Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the workshop on new tools and mapping for disasters and development. I am John Garrison, and I lead the bank's Global Civil Society team. And I want to especially welcome our colleagues from civil society that are here with us today, and also thank Interaction, our Interaction friends, particularly Suzanne and her team, for having co-organized this session with us. Thanks also to my colleagues at GFDRR and WBI from the bank for their hard work in putting this session together. I would like to say a few words about the broader development agenda, which frames this session in ways that's changing the World Bank. From the bank's perspective, open development enables greater citizen engagement, generates ideas, solutions, and innovations, and helps improve delivery of services to achieve better outcomes. Basically, open development is about answering four basic questions from our perspective. First, what and where are the opportunities to improve lives? Who is doing what about them? Is it working? And can I participate in the process? With the expanding pace of political change, explosion of technology, and changes to the development landscape, it is clear that we are headed towards a global model of open development, encompassing aid, governance, and knowledge, and is the development model based on openness and transparency. We are moving towards an era in which all donor activity around the world will be geo-coded and overlaid with critical poverty indicators to spur both accountability and action. And for the bank, while we will continue to lend money, the value of our data, tools, and connections may eventually eclipse our the power of our balance sheet. And that is where we're headed. I just want to, right now, talk about four areas in which we're heading in terms of open development. First, we're opening our data. The Open Data Initiative, for instance, continues to expand its reach and is focusing more and more on usability. Users from around the world now have free and easy access to more than 7,000 development indicators in 6 languages. For instance, recently we've also created new portals and databases on climate change, on jobs, and on gender. The Open Finances portal provides for the first time data on bank budgets and project financing going back to 1947. So you have a treasure trove of information about every bank project that's funded since that time. Through our Apps for Development competition, participants from more than 30 countries generated more than 100 tools and applications, which makes bank data more accessible via handheld devices, particularly cell phones in developing countries. Second, we're opening information on our operations. Data on our projects and operations are available via new highly accessible project portal and in the International Aid Transparency Initiative, IATI format. For instance, the Mapping for Results program visually locates bank finance projects and in combination with subnational socioeconomic indicators such as poverty, health, malnutrition, and population density. Third, with partners, the bank is exploring new ways to convene and build knowledge and facilitate South-South and bank civil society exchanges. The Haiti and water hackathons, for instance, and this workshop are good examples of how technology and this greater philosophy for openness is leading the bank and civil society to collaborate more. And fourth, we are supporting our clients' efforts in open development agenda through open government initiatives in such countries as Kenya, Colombia, and Mongolia. And we're working to help them create their own open data initiatives. In closing, our colleagues here have planned an exciting and stimulating agenda of panels and hands-on presentations. You'll have the premium room of the World Bank, which is the President Auditorium here, and the outlying room. So I think you're going to have a very interactive and stimulating session today. And we look forward to your ideas and comments. And our hope is that through this kind of discussion, and we can learn to collaborate more on the ground among our institutions, the World Bank and the CSOs. So with that, let me turn the session over to Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Here.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see everybody here this afternoon. I'm Suzanne Kinderwater, the Vice President of Strategic Impact at Interaction. And I'm very glad, on behalf of Interaction, to welcome you all and to send greetings to you from our President and CEO, Sam Worthington. We're co-hosting and delighted to be doing so this session today with the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. And we also have several partners, and we'd like to thank them: the World Bank Institute, the World Bank Civil Society Group, and Sustainable Development Network Information Services. Many, if not most of us here today in this room, have been working on mapping in one form or another for several years now. So it's really great to be able to set aside this block of time to really focus down in depth on its applications for more effective disaster response and development. And special congratulations to the bank for its own leadership role as we come together with the Open Data, now Open Development initiative, which just had its second birthday. I think it was last month. In our own community, Interaction and our 200 organizational members raise billions of dollars annually from individuals and private sources. We recognize our responsibility to our community members in the field and to our donors to share information on how those funds are spent. Mapping technology has enabled us to begin to mine this vast reservoir of member data and to make the information public and easily accessible. Interaction took our first steps toward the development of our own NGO aid map about 5 years ago, when USAID and the Gates Foundation were interested in what our members were doing in the sectors of agriculture and food security. And then when the Haiti earthquake hit 2 years ago, we launched our Haiti aid map on who was doing what where, as a means to promote coordination amongst donors and transparency with the public. At its heart, mapping is about openness, as John said, the openness that is critical for inclusive development and a thriving civil society. In order for citizens to shape their own development, they need information on development activities and on spending by donors, as well as what their own governments are doing. So today's workshop ultimately is designed to move us ahead in this openness to which we're all committed. As we go through the afternoon, I hope that the hands-on experience with various top-of-the-line mapping technologies and creative mapping applications will spark some new insights on data management and visualization. I also hope, as John indicated, that we'll identify some new synergies that can pave the way for greater collaboration. Considering the enormity of the data that potentially could be mapped globally, it's essential to work together to scale up our efforts. So now we're going to start with our opening plenary panel, and I'll introduce them and then they'll just take it away. The overall focus today, and what we're going to start with our three speakers, is this emphasis on learning, and learning from those who have the actual experience, how to maximize mapping technology and other open source tools in our own work. So it's a very hands-on session, and I think a lot of you are probably attracted for that reason, and we'll have breakout sessions. You'll be moving around. The opening plenary features 3 speakers who are all leaders in utilizing open source tools for community-based programming: Mikel Marin, Abby Baca, and Susana Rojas Williams. I want to thank each of you for being here today. Their full bios are in your packets, but I'll just give a general overview of their backgrounds and what they're each going to focus on. Mikkel is a programmer and geographer working for impactful community and humanitarian uses of open source and open data. He's co-founder of Ground Truth Initiative and the Map Kibera project, and also on the board of OpenStreetMap Foundation and president of the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. Mikkel will talk about his experience in open community mapping and the intersections between the open source and development communities. Abby then will present examples of how the World Bank is capitalizing on open source tools, particularly in disaster risk management, with a focus on community mapping in Indonesia. Abby is a member of the World Bank's East Asia and Pacific Disaster Risk Management team as the focal point for the effective use of geospatial risk information in disaster risk management decision-making. And then we'll wrap up with Susanna, who tell us how Habitat for Humanity is using GIS to support communities in rebuilding Haiti, as well as about their work with community mapping in Bolivia. Susanna is director of the International Shelter Initiatives at Habitat, where she provides technical support to various shelter and program initiatives around the world. Each of the speakers will have about 15 minutes, and then we'll throw it open to your questions for another 15 minutes. And I've told them I'm going to be a bit tough on the timing because we have a full program today, and we want to be able to move along. So with no further ado, I'll ask Mikkel to kick off our discussion. Welcome.
Good afternoon. So great. Hi, my name is Mikkel Marin, and as you heard, I wear many hats, but today for this talk, I'm representing Ground Truth Initiative. And, we're talking about new open approaches to community mapping, and this is generating lots of excitement. That's why we're here today. It's not just a technology, it's also an approach, and it makes me wonder, this open community mapping, what is the excitement really about? And what are the range of ideas that we have about what community mapping, open community mapping really means? And what kind of conversation can we have to ultimately shape this practice, which is still very early, into something which is of greatest benefit to the community? So in 2009, Ground Truth initiated a project called Map Kibera. We worked with young people in the Kibera slum of Nairobi to help them map their own neighborhoods in OpenStreetMap and report on their communities and tell their own stories. This Kibera, it's a center of so much attention and development, but at that time was literally a blank spot on the map. And as of today, it's very much on the map. The original seed has bloomed, and what we thought was going to be a 3-week project is now an NGO, a registered trust in its own right, going on its 3rd year, expanded throughout all of Nairobi. And one of the cornerstones of Map Kibera, and I think of open community mapping generally, is the OpenStreetMap project. This is one demonstration of the kind of thing you can do with OpenStreetMap. This is a map cake. This is actually Washington, D.C. represented as in cake form, which shows the full freedom of what you can do with open source mapping. And OpenStreetMap is a free and open map of the entire world. Anyone can contribute. Anyone can use OpenStreetMap. It's an amazing data source and an amazing community. And really, this open source community and many other open source communities, I think, have inspired some of the greatest achievements in disaster response and in development over the past few years. Map Kibera generated a lot of interest, and since leaving Nairobi at the end of 2010, we've been trying to figure out why and how whatever those techniques are, how they apply in different contexts. And One answer that I think is it's similar to how the open data community has successfully provided a space where people from very different backgrounds, technologists and people concerned with governance and policy, have a common space and a common language and common set of techniques to work together. Similarly, the greatest potential of open community mapping is the great ability to level, to create a common, accessible way to communicate and relate that reaches across social, economic, and political boundaries. Technology, as we know, is shiny and beautiful and inspiring, and it has the ability to trick us sometimes and create spaces where real-life differences are still relevant, but they're surmountable. This marks such a departure from centuries of practice in mapping and communication. Traditionally, maps, data, and mass media are tools of the powerful. They provided means to bring legibility to the domain, reading and writing the details of people's lives. In order to enable the activities of the state, we hope to benefit the community, benefit the people. And these data and stories carried authority and absolute information. And in just the past few years, this has completely changed. The potential has completely changed. Anyone has the potential to make their own world legible and for whatever purpose they want. And I think we're just beginning to see what kind of changes that's going to make in our political systems and in the way we practice development. Now, community data, as I see it, is a bit different from just open data. Open data, as it has been practiced, is wonderful, but it focuses largely on the international and national levels. And the aggregation and filtering and the plain inability to reach down lower into the community level, I think it obscures where ultimately we're hoping development has an impact at the community level on the ground. In some cases, you could almost say having an open data website has the potential to obscure an actual lack of transparency. I think it's a danger. So the institutional interest in community mapping that we're seeing, I think, is a really good sign that in order to truly fulfill the promise of open data, we need to breach those traditional limits of legibility. This is what an open data community can look like. This is a community in Kosovo of high school and college kids who are fanatic about OpenStreetMap. When I first met them, they were throwing mapping parties that were catered by their moms. Nowadays, just a couple years later, they're key partners with UNICEF in the Innovation Lab in Kosovo and are really fundamentally, they're contributing to the future of a place which is just finding its footing as a state in its own right. And there are risks, of course, but it's not, I think, the usual risks that we hear about open mapping. Those mappers are not a crowd. Crowdsourcing is a term which is used often for the kinds of things we do, but I think it distorts much of what how these new technologies actually work. We're not a faceless wild mob. This image is, I think, what sets up the confusion you hear again and again about trustworthiness of open community data. Really, the successful open projects are communities, they're quite complex communities, which have real trusted relationships between the individuals involved, both online and offline. And these people care a lot about their common endeavor, and to me that doesn't quite describe a crowd. And I think there are other misunderstandings, at least when it came to the Map Kibera project. A lot of the attention I think Map Kibera got is because of low expectations, honestly. Slum dwellers are not experts. They're very barely educated in most circumstances with little formal experience, and they live on the edge of poverty. I think they're surprised that a slum dweller could actually master the same tools that all of us in this room use. And I wonder why. To me, it comes to the question of like, why are the poor poor? Is it their intrinsic fault? There are huge global forces at work in the world today that are beyond anyone's control, and they're accelerating urbanization in slums. The estimate of UN Habitat is 2 billion by 2030, and unless we have higher expectations of what slum dwellers can do, we're all going to be in a heck of a lot of trouble. We see in our work mapping, how we practice mapping, the focus is on more than just data collection and mapping. For us, people love maps and data, but it can be a distraction from the full story. Map Kibera, we have a strong voice in the projects. There's a voice of Kibera, there's the Kibera News Network, and communities are becoming their own journalists and storytellers, essentially. And in contrast to data, which has the sort of appearance of being objective around it, stories definitely aren't. Stories are subjective. And if we allow for this kind of community empowerment beyond just data, then it requires a remarkable release of control. Communities will say things you might not want to hear. But without the stories, the data alone, it can potentially be nothing more than simple data extraction yet again. And it's easy to misinterpret what a community is. A community is hard to understand. It's precisely defined. But it's certainly people living in a place. Outsiders, whether practicing development or officials or students, necessarily bring a remove to the place. There's a lack of, how much heart can you put in it if you don't actually have to go sleep at night in a place like Kibera? So ensuring that it's the actual community, whatever that means in a particular place, this is not something which you can put into a formula. It takes a deliberate, trusted engagement. Communities are not monolithic. They have huge divisions and struggles. And this is where it's important to recognize that the technology that we're bringing to these situations not only have the potential to enhance the positive aspects of the community, but at worst can be a risk. The technology is not the end goal. I think in this way, open community mapping has a lot more in common with traditional community development approaches than ICT4D. There's an established practice of participatory development which is totally non-technical, which is totally not open mapping. And what can we learn from them? There, I think, is about relationships and understanding. There's an understanding that communities don't scale, but they grow. And there's a real concern with how the data is used and who has access to the data. We have to hold our own projects strictly to the account of who has access. And we have to make sure that the data that's being created doesn't do any harm. What kind of data puts communities and individuals at risk? With the work that we do, only public infrastructure, never collecting any demographic data, just because it's inevitably there's risks involved. This is another community. This is East Jerusalem. And this is another place which is so well known and so talked about, but yet not on the map. So there's a group which we're working with called Grassroots Jerusalem, who are working with community-based organizations to use OpenStreetMap and tell their own stories. This map is of a place called Awalaje, which is somewhere between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and the security barrier, the wall, is being built entirely around the village. So obviously this is a very tense political situation. Are we prepared to also allow these kind of places and these kind of communities to tell their stories and really be on the map? We're all learning. The World Bank signed an MOU with Google, as we know, in January, announced it in the New York Times by highlighting all the amazing work they had done with OpenStreetMap. And now I'll admit the legal details of open mapping are very obscure. But this episode, I think, has provided an opportunity for us all to learn more about what these things actually really mean and grapple with the kind of issues that we're also talking about today. There was learning, and the community benefited, and in the end, the World Bank states that the World Bank only supports citizen mapping efforts that give users free access to the map data they create. I couldn't have said it better myself, and I hope we keep learning together, like we did with this. I think we need to define the key requirements of open community data and open community mapping. So allow me this first draft. It's open data. It's in an open community that everyone has access to take part in. Communities, people are doing it directly themselves using the tools that are most appropriate for them. And the outcomes are connected directly to their immediate needs and freely available in convenient forms. There's probably a lot more to add here. This is an example of a concrete thing that can only be accomplished with this kind of openness. HOT, you'll hear more about Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team later, has supported the Haitian OpenStreetMap community in the transition from disaster response and recovery to community building. And this is a tap-tap map which shows the routes of informal public transit in Haiti. And this would only have been possible having a community which had full access to the skills and the data which was created during the response to the earthquake. So in these next steps, as institutions become interested in communities, I think we need to take heed. Open source communities and marginalized communities do share some characteristics. They can be distorted and affected by the great gravity of the spotlight and by funding, and this is still a young, small practice that we're doing here that needs space to grow. A lot of the practitioners are in the room today, and I wonder how can we create a space where these network structures, as they meet institutions, what kind of dialogue, what kind of space can we create to really shape this practice well together? One idea, perhaps we should practice more about what we preach. And in OpenStreetMap, things go on the map immediately. Some of them suck. There's no filter, it goes public, and the feedback comes. The way we practice citizen journalism, anything that gets created gets pushed out. We don't wait for perfection. And this kind of learning by doing results in very quick improvement. For our practice of community mapping, I think it's too easy to fool ourselves and to not fully disclose our challenges. And perhaps we should try to overshare and be our own worst critic in a space where we won't have repercussions for the work that we do. How can we create that kind of space, and how else can we do better? Oh my God, that's anyway. Yes, a fundamental power shift. Essentially, the excitement of community mapping is beyond.
That's citizen journalism, right?
This is, yes, exactly. So I'm letting it all hang out. That's amazing. Let me say, there's a possibility of a fundamental shift in power dynamics. And this is an important point. So mainly, if people know the facts about their own lives, they have more power to call institutions to account, and they have more power to make change themselves and to affect their own lives for the better. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you.
Mikhail, thank you very much for starting us off with that grounding in community and that grounding in the issues of control and who's in the driver's seat. It's very easy with open tools, open data, to get carried away with the technologies. The technologies are really cool, but that it's really about good disaster assistance and development, which we know is really about communities taking the initiatives themselves. Two of your phrases really rang out for me: remarkable release of control and deliberate, trustful engagement. And I don't think those are the kind of words we often hear around open data. So this is a great way to start. We're going to go now to another focus, another application, which is open source tools in the context of disaster risk management. And Abby will be leading us off on that. Thanks, Abby.
Good afternoon. Great to be here. I might have some typos too, but maybe not as fun. So my name is Abby Baca, and I'm part of the East Asia Pacific Disaster Risk Management team. I also am lucky to be part of a close community with the GFDRR as well. And much of my time at the bank has been in the GFDRR, focusing on how we can build these tools more into the state of practice at the World Bank. What I'd like to start with is an initiative that really builds on the open data principles that were discussed, that the bank is trying to embody both in the disaster management field and then more broadly in development, and the type of information that the bank creates. The World Bank, because it is seen as an authoritative creator of information, then has this motivation and this duty to share it to the greatest good of its constituents and clients. So in the practice of disaster risk management, we also deal with a lot of data and a lot of information. And what we would like is that this information is best used to support better decisions that help reduce risk and build resilience. So the Open Data for Resilience initiative is about this opening of information and facilitation of the tools that enable our clients and communities to really make better decisions. What I'm going to be focusing on are some of the experiences that I've had in disaster risk management projects in Indonesia. And Indonesia, I think, is in the news pretty frequently because of its vulnerability and experience of disasters. It has some of the most frequent occurrences of many perils, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and flooding. But when we think about the practice of disaster risk management, we want to think of the types of questions that the practitioners in the country themselves are asking. They're asking things like, how can we build safer schools? Where should they be located? How could we actually best use the funding that we have available to target retrofitting programs to strengthen the infrastructure that we have? And in our support of the growing capacity to do this in country, the disaster risk management community and agencies are asking, how can we best prepare for the inevitable disasters? And so we're looking to see what are the tools that can help do this. And it's great to be amongst so many practitioners of mapping in the practice of NGO work in disasters and development in general. So we'll be focusing on some of those questions. But first, I wanted to have a little bit of a primer with risk assessment for people who don't think about this every day, although I'm pretty sure that a number of you do. When we're talking about disasters, we have to have some ability to understand the hazard that people are exposed to. This helps us understand what is it that can cause damage. Is a community exposed to a flood, an earthquake, landslide, all of the above? And how can we get the best information that characterizes these hazards? On the other side, we want to know what exactly is at risk. Are we talking about the people themselves? What about what's important to those people, the infrastructure, the houses, the schools? And how are we best able to collect that information so that we can use this in our accurate assessment of the likely impacts of the disaster? So both of these, the understanding of hazard and what's at risk, have to go into the information in order to better manage risk. So I'm going to focus a little bit on what's at risk and how we collect that. And as we've heard from Mikkel, engaging directly with the community is a really good way to understand what's important to them and how they would like to make themselves more resilient. So the practice of engaging communities into the process of building resilience is very important, and the community mapping process is one way to do that. And you want to think, how are you enabling them to communicate more broadly what is most important to them? Do they want to communicate aspects of poverty mapping? And how can that be used then for the practice of reducing risk? And when we were thinking about this question with our partners, we had the suggestion to explore OpenStreetMap as a tool. So why is it, and how did we come to that? Well, there are a couple very important characteristics that the OpenStreetMap community and tools offer. First of all, it's open source, free and open source software that enables both online and offline mapping. It provides a common platform where this information can be uploaded, hosted, and shared with anyone and everyone throughout the world. What's also really important, and we saw so many examples in Mikkel's talk of how many communities there are out there that are engaging with these tools. And so having that sense of connection to a global community of users is also found to be very important. So what does it take to start to build this type of community and this type of ownership in a place like Indonesia? It doesn't happen overnight, especially those aspects of trust and of capacity. You have to really invest to build that. And so the partners that some of the bank projects have been working with are the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, and then the Australia-Indonesia Facility for Disaster Reduction. AIFDR is a partnership between the Indonesian government and the Australian government. It's based in Jakarta, so it's not imported expertise. It directly builds the capacity of Indonesia's disaster risk management organization. So who would be good community members for this work? Universities are a great place where you have the capacity that's being invested in young people, the government agencies who would want to make use of these tools and the information that they produce, and then of course the NGO and civil society groups that already have a long and trusting relationship built in many of these communities. So I'd like to share some results that have happened over the course of a little over a year. There have been over 25 individual training sessions with a variety of different groups from the NGOs, universities, and government organizations. There was actually a mapping contest held among 5 of Indonesia's largest universities. And in the process of that, there was over 40,000 buildings mapped. The prize was that the winners got to come to the State of the Map Congress in Denver. So I'm not sure if any of you guys were there and got to meet some of the delegation from Indonesia, but that was pretty exciting. But more broadly, over 500 people have been trained in these tools, and almost 200,000 buildings have been mapped. What's also really exciting is that there's been a launch of the OpenStreetMap portal for Indonesians, built by Indonesians in Bahasa, that also includes a detailed training module on the OpenStreetMap tools in Bahasa. So what are some examples of how all of this information has come together for the type of DRM projects? So following the Thai floods in Bangkok, the people in Jakarta started getting a little nervous. They were really concerned that they would be the next Bangkok. The idea that how can you really understand the type of risks and the potential for damage and loss that your city would face was a very big question. And so the Disaster Management Organization wanted to instigate an unprecedented type of contingency planning exercise. So this was led by both the national and then the Jakarta Province Disaster Management Agency. And we built a partnership which was led by the Indonesian counterparts, but with the support of the AusAid programs, HOT, OCHA also was involved, and the World Bank GFDRR. So how this ended up unfolding was that over 500 representatives from across the whole city, and Jakarta, by the way, in the immediate province has about 9 million people, and then in the broader agglomeration has over 20 million people. So you're talking about a lot of people. And it's broken down into over 250 urban villages. Each of these urban villages have an elected official who represents them. And so these officials, as called by the mayor, came to participate in the mapping process. Now, luckily, the investment that was made in training students in building capacity at the local university served as a very good asset for this project. The University of Indonesia students also joined the team and were there to help lead the mapping together with each of these different village heads. So over the course of this project, together they mapped over 4,000 buildings, which were focused on the critical infrastructure that was important to each of those urban villages. What was also important was at the neighborhood level, that is also where tighter community bonds exist. There had been no boundary files for people to even understand where those villages were. And so together they mapped out almost 3,000 individual sub-village boundaries, which will be enormously useful not just for the contingency planning, but more broadly for governance. And so how then did we put this information together with our understanding of the flood risk? And so that's where the investment made together with the Disaster Management Agency and our partners at AusAid, we've been working to develop an open source scenario assessment tool called INASAFE, the Indonesia Scenario Assessment for Emergencies, which allows you to use an understanding of a hazard event, in this case, a flooding event that has happened in Jakarta. This displays the flood heights that would be expected throughout the city. Through the mapping exercises, you're able to collect detailed building level information about where the critical assets are, and INASAFE calculates which ones are likely to be impacted. So this information is very important when you're preparing for the disaster and understanding where you should do things like position your critical assets and response tools. So what I want to highlight is that these types of projects are possible because of the growing set of resources and open source tools that we have available. It's not just about the tools, though. It's the fact that these tools tend to build community and community capacity around them. And so not only have we been leveraging OpenStreetMap, we've been also using the GeoNode data sharing platform as a way that more people can have access to this information, and also the analytical powers of quantum GIS. I think my colleague Ariel will be talking a bit more about how we've been using GeoNode in other ways. And Kate Chapman is here. She's the expert who's done all of the hot work in Indonesia. So if you have more questions, I think she's also giving a session on OSM as well. So thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow the community in Indonesia, you can follow them on Twitter. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Abby, and there'll be more chance to learn about this, as Abby said, through her colleagues and also in the Q&A if there's more you'd like to find out. Here was a really good example of how communities and governments and donors work together with data. So just expanding kind of our repertoire of issues here and possible applications. And now, finally, we'll hear from Susanna, who I have to say with pride is with an Interaction member, Habitat for Humanity. And she'll focus on how Habitat, as I said, is using GIS to support communities in rebuilding Haiti, as well as some of their work in Bolivia.
Thank you for inviting me to present at this plenary. It's a pleasure to be here. The Director for International Shelter Initiatives and with Habitat for Humanity International. I'm very happy to be here with all of you that focus on technologies and different tools, and still hear from my colleagues the work of community and community approaches. Habitat for Humanity has been working for a long time on different types of participatory approaches to support the work of communities on the ground. And we've also been looking at new tools and technologies in a way of how can we strengthen that process. So perhaps we're coming a little bit from the other side, from the community perspective, from the community side. And I'll use this opportunity at the plenary to actually present more of reflections on the integration of the technology into these participatory processes and what that means for our work on the ground. Using the examples of our work in Haiti and disaster response in Bolivia. So how do I run this? So I wanted to start with the context today. It's not new, but it's different. With people and communities at the center of the relief and development process, which is the way in which we work on the ground, participatory process has been used traditionally to engage, bring together different local stakeholders and enable joint solutions through a variety of assessments, mapping analysis, enumerations, participatory design, community action planning. Many of you may be very familiar with all those different types of methodologies. Today, the demand for speed, access to information, transparency, somebody mentioned accountability, who are the people we're serving, where is the money going, enhanced coordination, reduced transaction costs has spurred and supported the introduction of these new technological tools. However, how can these tools best support community-based processes, engagements in response and development? We need to be mindful that our people are the ones at the center of the process, at the center of the development of recovery process, and be mindful that the technology doesn't take that center stage and sideline communities or local stakeholders or governments. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of one of our projects, an enumeration in Simon-Pelé, where the main focus was to work together as a neighborhood to identify priority needs as a critical steps towards rebuilding after the earthquake. Simon-Pelé is an informal settlement in the Delmas municipality in Port-au-Prince. It hasn't been formally recognized. It's very dense, but however, despite that, they have de facto security of tenure. After the earthquake, at least 8,000 of those residents now live in one of the 8 camps surrounding the neighborhood. So Habitat for Humanity came with the idea of helping them identify what are the solutions that would have, what are the assets that they have, what are the risks that they're facing so that they can rebuild better. And one of the processes that we will use will be that of an enumeration of capturing basic statistical data about the community and identify solutions based on that. And for that, we reached out to new technologies, GIS and GPS systems. I'm also going to be walking you through another project, improving access to urban land and property rights for women and excluded families in Cochabamba, Bolivia, where the focus has been to increase access to urban land and property rights for women and excluded families through more transparent and accountable national and municipal governance. 70% of the population live without secure land tenure. And the first step to be able to address the needs of this particular community and help them access security of tenure and other basic services was to understand what their context was, to understand the reality of their situation, the limitation, the constraints, and that's where community mapping comes into place in this context too. So how can these new tools can support these two seemingly different but very similar processes? They can help us create a better understanding of the community assets, the risks and vulnerabilities, especially in the context of informal settlements where there's not much information, where very little has been collected. They could, by understanding those assets, by understanding the situation of those communities, then we can actually work with the communities and looking at redevelopment, upgrading, or perhaps relocation options. They would also support us with improved security of tenure, plan the provision of infrastructure and services, enable residents to be able to advocate for other basic services, community planning, inform future programs. The opportunities are very much open. Reflecting on these two experiences and looking at how these technologies can really support these participatory processes that I referred to and the way in which we try to engage, that we work with communities, I just wanted to highlight 3 main aspects. And one of them is about building trust. The technology cannot replace interaction. The interaction is critical to how we work with these different with the people, with community leaders, with local authorities. But it can support and it can even strengthen that interaction if it's done properly. Technology should be accessible to all, including disadvantaged, vulnerable groups. And one way that we can do that is leverage data collection, for example, with families and relevant stakeholders to build trust and transparency. So families wouldn't have necessarily access to information that has been collected by other groups. Yes, access to information is critical, but they need to be able to be part of that collection of information, of that processing, of identifying what is the information that needs to be gathered, of designing those surveys. They need to be part of understanding their own realities. If you look at some of the images, you can see our women in Bolivia were actually very engaged in identifying the different coordinate points and mapping the communities to be able to delineate the plots that were going to be regularized. University students in Haiti were part of the training to support with some of the GPS work that was also mapping the different plots in the community. One risk that we saw is university students coming into the community and sometimes not engaging with the communities, but focusing so much on the data collection that could create some distrust or lack of communication. So we work in engaging as much as we could the students, so they are not mainly there to collect information, but also to help mobilize, contribute to mobilize the community. So how we collect the data, how we are able to identify what we need to collect it's really critical. New tools can facilitate communication and support consensus building, fast sharing of information, easier access, real-time revisions, and exploration of options. So of course, there's a lot of opportunities, but there are things that we need to consider. Legitimacy and identity. The precision and sophistication of the new tools, of the new technologies, have improved data gathering and quality of information. There's increased awareness about the realities of these communities. The new tools create opportunities for them to better understand their realities. Communities are able to see themselves spatially, understand their boundaries, and relate spatially to their challenges, assets, and how they might relate to other communities and resources. But it's very critical that we're able to support a learning environment for this community so that they can question the information, so that they can discuss it, so that they can use it to make decisions, so that they can validate that information. It's also important, particularly for the type of work we do working with vulnerable communities and informal communities, that not have all the time have access to these new technologies, is that these technologies come incrementally so that they don't become overwhelmed. So ownership and empowerment. This is something that has brought up already in the previous presentations. It's important to know who owns the data and who uses the data, which data and at which scale. We collect a lot of information that is related to the socioeconomic status of the communities. There's a lot of tension that can be created between governments and communities, especially when you're talking about land regularization processes and being able to identify where these communities are and the potential that perhaps there could be some evictions in the future. So being able to understand clearly who owns and who uses that data is critical, and to be able to build agreements up front. Affected communities and beneficiaries are also an integral part of the decision-making process. And just to highlight, the maps and the products that come up of this process are powerful advocacy tools, needs assessment tools, planning tools, and contribute to policy. Okay. I'm going to This is just a quick example of some of the maps that we have created tied to land use in Bolivia and insecurity and security, particularly for women in Haiti. What happened here? Sorry about that, that was fast. Just a quick sense of some of the achievements that have taken place in Haiti that have been tied to the participatory approach that we have of engaging the different communities, supported by these different technologies. Because of that, we have a community action plan in Simon Pelé that it was developed and known by the community, 36 different types of maps that deal with service and infrastructure, flooding and fire risk, security and insecurity, household surveys, home and lands boundaries map, different enumerators that have been trained for different types of community contracts so that people, based on the information that they were able to capture and the solutions that they were able to identify, are working now in implementing those projects. Achievements in Cochabamba. 130 women and 25 men leaders were educated on the technical and legal aspects of secure tenure and land rights, based on the understanding that they had that was part of the initial community mapping. Women play a key role using GPS for land surveying and mapping, organized participatory mapping, collected plot plans, and land tenure documentation. They were able to map risk areas, their priority needs were assessed, their urban plans were negotiated with municipal authorities. They are now at the table in decision-making dialogues with municipal and national authorities. So this is a little bit of what I'm trying to highlight. How can these tools, how can these different technologies can support this process? This is the end result of what we want to see. And one last thing with Bolivia. Gender-related issues on urban land and property rights have been made visible to authorities because of those maps and the products that they were able to create. There's increased awareness about women's rights, which goes beyond the technologies. There's increasing number of women who know their rights and have the knowledge and skill to organize around that issues. They are the ones who are measuring and capturing the information on the different plots. The maps have been integrated to municipal cadasters and land rights register office. They have been able to use the information for conflict resolution. And of course, this has contributed to the development of products that can contribute to policy change and lasting change. And thank you very much for your attention.
Susanna, thank you very much. So with Susanna's presentation, we have an example of an NGO, Habitat, that has a long history of participatory processes in its work. So the lens that they brought right from the outset, thinking of these tools, is how can the tools support these processes, and clearly maximized what they were already doing with communities in areas she mentioned, including consensus building, building a learning environment, and that last one that really struck me, making visible issues of power and rights with the women's land tenure issue, land ownership issue that can become a basis for actual organizing. These aren't often applications that I've heard for technology sitting here in Washington. So I think this is a wonderful way to start us off with these themes again of trust, ownership, and who is really in the driver's seat. So now it's your turn to raise some issues, and what we'll do for the next 15 minutes is take questions in batches of 3 or so. And if you could be fairly brief in your responses so that we have some time for bouncing back and forth. So when you're called on, please stand so people, or I guess it's easier if you sit so we can hear you. Just say your name and where you're from, and keep your question or comment kind of brief. Okay? So who'd like to start the questions? Did they answer everything in what they said? No, nothing ingling in your mind? Yes. Can you turn that on, Eric?
Hey, Eric Anderson from Mapbox. Hey, Mikkel, going back to community mapping in regards to quality assessment, how do you actually see, like, when a team's working on a project, where they know they basically need to verify some of the data coming out? What's that, like, say a team at the bank or say a team at an NGO, how do they actually start working with the wider community? What's that initial relationship been like? I mean, many of us are just getting started working with OSM right away, so we might be putting new data in or whatnot, or tracing certain data. How do you see that first entrance into the community work?
Okay, started with a question on OpenStreetMap. A couple other questions so we can get the flow going here. Yes.
Nate Smith with ICF International. In these community mapping activities, do you see a pathway to supporting more conventional, like cadastral mapping and legally based, mapping with legal standing and higher precision and things like that? Is this a pathway to that? Is there a handoff, or is that a great leap? Thanks.
One more before we get the responses. Nobody in the back there. Yes. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. It's
trying to measure or evaluate how to measure trust in community mapping.
And what's your name?
Dane Springmeyer.
From?
HOT-OSM.
Okay, great, thanks. One question particularly for Mikkel, and then the other two questions, any of you are welcome to take. So Mikkel, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I think the best first step for anyone who's interested in this kind of thing is to actually do it. I mean, it becomes very evident what the work is about when you actually take part, and I think there is, everyone's very busy, of course, but there is, and not always opportunities like today, try out what OpenStreetMap is actually about, because I have seen like kind of misconceptions about how it actually works. Spend some time with the community before thinking about before thinking about, well, how is it going to work on the other side of the world? Map your own neighborhood. That's and dive in a little bit. It's not like any community out there. It's a very complicated community itself. It has an interesting reputation, but very welcoming to newcomers. So that's my advice for that.
Regarding the cadastral question that you had, I didn't highlight it on the presentation because the focus was on technologies, but it's very much, the particular case in Cochabamba was about being able to identify the boundaries of the different plots, negotiate those boundaries. That was part of the interaction process and the communication process, and then having families and having the community itself be part of the process as to validate those boundaries. But it's very much in line with regularization of tenure and eventual integration of those plots into a official cadastral of the municipality. And it's also, it's in a peri-urban area of Cochabamba, so it's integrating that community into the bigger urban fabric. So it's precise in that sense.
I wanted to comment a little bit on also, maybe not specifically cadastral, but official data sources that are used and seen as authoritative by the government. And of course, when we're working with our government partners, it's important that we're creating data that they have faith in to use. And so one of the examples that came out of the contingency planning exercise was that some of the information, a lot of the information they needed simply didn't exist in official form. So those sub-village boundaries were not in existence. It was something that the mapping agency, they were not producing those and had not produced those. And so the process now is to look at what's come out of the mapping process, and there will be validation. I mean, and this is a point that Kate has brought up to me, that in the process of creating any official data set, you go through a validation. OSM offers the tools to start with that raw data collection, and then there should be some review of it before certain people want to use it. But I think it's a very important point, and it did become part of an official government decision-making process. And I guess I was wondering about the question of trust, and I wasn't sure if that was trust in kind of the community's trust in the process or trust of the data, because I think that also the recognition of the value of this information for official decisions, I feel like there's an element of trust that goes into that, and there have been academic studies done on the data sets, on the OSM data sets in Indonesia, to show what the error rates are and to show what validation might be necessary. I mean, even when you look at what is an official data set, there's going to be an occurrence of error. And it's found that for the critical geospatial properties of many of the data sets collected, there's a very comparable level of accuracy to some of the official data sets. So I think that's an important step in establishing trust from the information that comes out of these tools.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
My name is Eric Boyer. I'm at George Washington University. And I just have a question, I guess, about the verification process and how you're able, I guess, to identify the accuracy of the information that you're getting. I mean, there was one comment that you said that the data that you got was very similar to the data that the government had. And so I'm wondering how in the process you're able to, I guess, to verify the accuracy of what you're bringing in.
I mean, I'll just make a quick comment since that follows on. And so it wasn't that data source, those exact features already existed in an official data source. It was comparing the thematic and spatial accuracy of the features that were collected to the thematic and spatial accuracy of other classes of information. So it wasn't that you already had a set in place to validate, but a university team went out with a different set of tools to then recollect a sample of the data and compare the results that they had for the spatial attributes and then the thematic attributes. And so I think there'll be a publication of the results of that coming out shortly that will go into much more detail on the methodology.
Mikkel and Suzanne, I think it'd be helpful to hear from both of you on that question too.
There's a phrase in open source software development, many eyes make old bugs shallow, and that's certainly how it applies in open data. Everything's immediately visible to the entire world, and there are people who care very much about the kind of mapping data which is created in their neighborhood, in the place where they spent a lot of time and effort mapping. And pretty much anything that is of questionable accuracy is picked up immediately. Of course, you have to have an active community, of course. So someone could create map data in a place where there's no one else who is active, and well, who is going to verify whether that's true or not? That's why the kind of work that Ground Truth does, that Humanitarian OpenStreetMap does, building community in new places is so important in order to have good accuracy. But I think I think what Abby is saying is that it's a bit of a red herring, because actually authoritative data suffers often. I mean, you see it from not having the level of accuracy approaching open data, open community data.
I will second some of that in terms of, many eyes certainly contribute to verified accuracy of the information. And the advantages that the technologies and new technologies and tools bring now, particularly in community processes, it's the ability to change the data rapidly, the ability to really allow for that interactive process to take place quite fast. So it's not that normally the information, the maps are posted on community centers, people go and validate and make comments, but the opportunities that the new technologies bring is that that can be changed almost in real time. And that type of, it really creates, it really strengthens the level of engagement that people can have when they have the opportunity to really make changes and verify it, and they can all agree jointly.
But again, that same emphasis of it has to rest on a strong community, and going back to the question in the back, that's based on trust and building that trust within the community. But if there's an external donor or an NGO, that also has to be there. Another round of questions before we move to the next session. Yes.
Pete O'Dell with Swan Island Networks. What's the interoperability capabilities of OpenStreetMaps? I mean, if suddenly you need to blend, the Esri mapping that the World Bank's talking about using and Google or Bing, I mean, is there an interoperability story here that data can immediately be moved over and used? And could you touch on that for a second?
Okay, let's get a few more questions on the table. Yes.
Yes, Omar Khan from Mercy Corps. My question is from, any of the panelists actually, in terms of use of the data. Two of the most common uses of the mappings are the planning side and the implementation side. And I wonder if any of you have any examples of using mapping tools for both planning in the communities and then implementation activities. And I wonder what the results were. Thanks.
Yes.
Yes, I'm Jean-Baptiste Migren from GFDR also, and we can observe that data sometimes is collecting a number of times with a lot of replication, and sometimes it's because users do not trust the collections that happened in the past. And I'm wondering if this also community process could help develop common methodologies for gathering and collecting data and developing information that can then be used more widely by different users for different purposes. Like for risk assessment, we have sometimes different views of what should be done for a correct risk assessment. And so for the best use of data and multiple purpose use of data, I think also the methodology can be improved with this community process.
Okay, three pretty big questions. So if you'd each just choose one that really zings for you.
I'll start with the interoperability question. There's two kinds of interoperability. There's technical and there's legal or licensing interoperability. The interoperability, at least with geographic data, that problem is pretty much solved. You have data in any geographic format. There are open source tools to transform it into others. The issue which you alluded to by mentioning other providers of geographic data has to do with the licensing around that data, and this is definitely something that we are still grappling with. The way that OpenStreetMap is licensed is designed to encourage the creation of data in the commons, where anyone can use it and reuse it. With the stipulation that you need to contribute your data back to the commons. It can be used for commercial purposes. This is often a very strange barrier that I find in development in the disaster response world. Data sets are released, but with non-commercial restrictions on them. And I think that if you have a place where there is a disaster and you actually find a commercial use for some data in that place, it is probably a good sign for the recovery of that place. So there's definitely a lot of issues there. They're kind of arcane. I've almost become, a lawyer in this extent, and it's not like a happy place, but it's something we do have to grapple with. And we certainly need to understand that commercial proprietary data sources are something we need to be very aware of what that means for communities.
If I can answer the one on beyond planning usage. Of course, traditionally, a lot of this information is used for planning purposes, for cadastral purposes. But some of the other uses that we have been able to have, and I'm speaking broadly about the experience of Habitat and not just about the case of Haiti and Bolivia, but it's tied a little bit to conflict resolution, particularly tied to land issues. So that process of verification with the community and understanding where those boundaries really are, and being able to use these maps or this information to facilitate that process. Also, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of advocacy, because the lack of access, the inequalities that are related to land access and property rights, particularly for women in Cochabamba, were made visible. And this is something that they could really rally around and be educated about and engage with the government to be able to secure the rights for women. Here. I would highlight those two things as some of the main things, also connected to risk mitigation. That's something that it's also been, in both cases in Haiti and Bolivia, in other communities where we're working, the maps have also been used to identify the areas of risk within the community and potential solutions, and prioritize the implementation of those projects. And slowly we're moving into bringing monitoring and evaluation as a way to, built in with GIS, to follow up how, over time, how those projects are being implemented. So that's some of the ways beyond planning that we are using the information.
And I would just add, on the end of that implementation, there's some really good examples of how the mapping is used during the reconstruction process after a disaster, and to improve the transparency of how assets are being reconstructed and invested in. So if a community has been promised 500 new homes, are 500 new homes built? Do you have the spatial information to show where they are? I'll get to the replication and standards question from my colleague Jean-Baptiste. And I would say, I would imagine that it's not a good thing to replicate when you're asking a single community the same question 5 different ways. And so in the disaster and climate change world, we kind of face this where you have one NGO that comes in to evaluate vulnerability to disasters, you have one NGO that comes in to evaluate vulnerability to climate change, and you have another one who monitors poverty statistics. And so I think with the tools, it would offer some scalability so that the resource that the community has to offer of themselves is better managed and capitalized on. I think that's pretty important. But in Indonesia, we're also looking at the limited resources and capacity at the local government level. And again, that same duplication could be minimized through a lot of these tools, and look at the multi-purposing of the information. Once you've collected the locations of critical infrastructure, it could be used for a variety of different purposes. On the standards and process, I think one of the things that what I found really compelling about the different exercises that have happened in Indonesia is it's not one size fits all, that there's a lot of different mixtures of approaches that will have resonance in a given situation. You know, whether or not there's existing imagery or capacity to do digitization is one thing, whether or not you'd want to do actual GPS mapping. There's a variety of different ways. So I think it's kind of, you would still want to absolutely bring the expertise of the people who come in and work directly with those communities to know what tools and approaches are best. But the standardization of the data themselves, I think, is really critical, and that does get to a bit of the interoperability issue as well. And so one of the reasons we're looking to invest in consistently invest in open source solutions is the adherence to standards, so that the flow of information from different platforms that have different purposes and different uses is easier. So I think that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Great, thanks. Our time is about up, but I'd like to pose one final question to each of you, and if you just take about one minute. My guess is that many of us here today, and I include myself, are not as far along or has had as full an experience in using open data and mapping as the three of you. So for people who are at a more beginner stage or exploring this or curious about it, what would be your most important piece of advice? If someone came to you and said, wow, how did you do this? What should I do? What should I think about?
Do not be challenged by the lack of institutional barriers that you find in open source communities. Encourage you to jump in full on. I think it's the most immediate way you can get to grips with how this stuff would actually be used, rather than, and it's not supposed to be hard. If you expect that someone in the field, someone in a community is going to do this, then yes, then you should try to do it yourself too.
I would say, going back to the communities at the driver cities, it's really understanding what are the capacities on the ground, the particular tools that may be already present and that the communities or the local authorities might be familiar with. I would look at opportunities for peer collaboration if there are other organizations or other neighborhoods or communities that are already doing it, because that peer-to-peer exchange is one of the best ways for communities that are not familiar with this process to do it. And also looking at local partnerships. Some of the countries where we have worked, where our national offices perhaps didn't have the immediate capacity, was liaising with universities and any other research institutions that can help build that capacity internally, so that we can do it more often.
I think being sensitive to the capacity, the existing capacity, is absolutely critical, and it's looking to see what resources are already available and where you can build on top of that. And I would say mapping things that people care about and feel ownership over is a very good place to start. And so I think not limiting, I know when we first started looking at mapping for disasters, we thought, well, we need to know these 4 things about every structure. And that's what we care about. That's what we need to know for our model to work. But those are not necessarily the same 4 things that the community would find valuable and care about. And maybe if they collected the 10 things that were most important to them, you'll have an overlap of a couple, but you really have to think about the multi-purposing from the start, is what's going to make this a live, sustainable process and data set, because all data expires. It has to be living and continually updated. So I think never thinking that you'll do that one collection and then it's a done deal and a finished process, but seeing it as an investment that's going to keep growing.
Great. Okay. Abby, Mikkel, and Susanna, thank you so much for your very rich presentations, but also wise insights as we launch into this now very practical, hands-on rest of the day. So please join me in thanking our panelists.
Okay, so we're now going to move into the part of the session that's going to move at lightning speed. It's called the Ignite Talks. We've rounded up about 6 people to give 5-minute presentations each on some of the dynamic tools that they're using open data. I get the task of being the timekeeper, so they each have 5 minutes, and once that 5 minutes is up, we're booting them off the stage. So first off, we have Soren Gigler, who's the Senior Governance Specialist in the Innovation Practice at the World Bank Institute, and he's going to be talking about mapping for results. This one.
Thank you so much. Oh, is it here? No. It's a presentation. Sorry. It's loaded? No?
Yeah, you can close that. Is yours on there?
No. Not there. Sorry, I have to load the presentation. They're all here?
It's already there. Yeah.
But could you...
03.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Great. Okay. Great. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm coordinating mapping for results. And the first thing I want to say, it's not about the maps. It's about transparency, openness, and changing the way the World Bank works. So making this place much more open, transparent, and hopefully to promote more inclusive development. So having said that, so the first issue we have the access to information policy, which has increased the availability of information, but one thing we found out, that's a huge difference between making information publicly available to PDFs and documents or making information and data accessible. And so basically together, and Tariq will talk more about the open data. So basically here you see the example of our project documents. So what is the World Bank doing? Where do we work, and what are its results? So you have these project documentations, but each of them are about 150 pages long. So if you want to know, for instance, in Bolivia or in Cochabamba, just before the speaker, what are we doing in Cochabamba, you would have to read thousands and thousands, hundreds, up to 1,000 pages to find that out. So what we've done is basically took out the information, we geocoded it, we put it on a map, and so for the first time, we could actually show on a regional level in the Africa region. So what is the World Bank doing in the Africa region? Second, in the Tanzania, now moving this to the country level. So the big question we had, what is the impact of our projects on the Millennium Development Goals? But not at the country level, but at the subnational level. So here see Tanzania. And in the south of Tanzania, the infant mortality rate is literally 15%. What does that mean? 15% of children don't survive the first year. In the north of Tanzania, this indicator is about half that number. It's about 7%. So the targeting, where do we work, is actually really important. And not just us, but where other donors work as well. So now the objective is to enhance the monitoring of results, improve targeting, improve transparency, promote social accountability, and then also get feedback from citizens and civil society on those programs. So here, this is the first pilot we did in Bolivia. So exactly this was the key challenge. So on the left side, you see the poverty map with the Ministry of Planning. We helped them to do this. So you see basically the western part, Potosi, Cochabamba, Potosi, Oro, the very dark area, up to 95% of people live under $1 a day. So complete poverty. And in the east, you have only about 30% of the population. And then on the right side, you see where the projects were actually targeted. And many of the projects were targeted in the east. So the question came up on where should we target? And so now you can apply this at different levels, as I've shown before. And then this is the question about infant mortality rate and health. Again, here, Kenya. So you see the infant mortality rates and where do World Bank projects work. And then this causes, of course, raises interesting questions and which are completely open and transparent. And you also see the total investment now. So the progress so far, we have now applied this to all countries we work in, so 143. We've mapped more than 30,000 locations, all of the underlying data completely free, openly available. Many people here in the room have used the data to produce their own visualizations and tools. And then you get a quick overview about what is doing that. So now a key question is, so now the next phase we are moving into the citizens, so empowering citizens to provide direct feedback on project results. So here you see a first pilot. We are engaged in in Nigeria, in the Africa region. These are consultations with civil society on World Bank project results. And here we are just planning a tool which is called On Track, but my colleague Koshal will present this later. Now, what we're really excited, and we talked a lot with Interaction about this, is so if the World Bank is doing this, this is important, interesting, but not meaningful yet. But if all agencies would do this, then it would become really exciting. So here what we've done, first we've basically launched this Open Aid partnership, which brings together donors, civil society, foundations, and multilaterals to developing mapping of all donor assistance and NGO programs. So here, in this case, it's the donors. So we have mapped with the Ministry of Finance all official development aid in Malawi. It's actually $6.7 billion by 27 donors. So here, for the first time ever, you see where the different donors work, in which sector, and where the money is flowing. And this has now been endorsed by 8 countries, and we are in conversation with many more. Thank you very much.
Great. Now we have Tarek Kokar, who has one of the coolest titles ever, the Open Data Evangelist at the World Bank, and he's going to present on what's the role of open data in development. Yeah, I don't know which one, actually.
Hi, so I'm Tarek Kokar, the World Bank's Open Data Evangelist. So back in December 2004, an earthquake in the Indian Ocean triggered an enormous tsunami that ultimately went on to claim the lives of over 250,000 people in South and Southeast Asia. About 2 months after the tsunami, there was an unusual case of the measles, which presented itself in a young girl living about 60 miles south of Banda Aceh. So the epidemiologists went to investigate, and what they discovered was this girl had received measles vaccines, but she'd received 3 measles vaccines from 3 different aid agencies, and those vaccines were causing her symptoms. So the classic aid organization response to this sort of problem is, let's create an aid coordination committee, which is a great idea, right? Maybe not. A different way of looking at it is, how about we establish a culture of being open by default, about creating open tools and open processes that make it easy for everyone to be open about what they know and open about what they do. Does that sound like a better idea? Yeah, a few nods in the room. That's the crux of open data in development. That's what it's about. So what exactly is open data? Firstly, data, anything you can stick on a computer. That's what data is. The open bit is interesting. So to be open, you've got to be open in 2 ways. And Mikkel said it a bit earlier. So you've got to be legally open and technically open. If something is legally open, it means that you're allowed to use it. You have explicit permission to do what you like with it, to reuse it for your own purposes. And if something is technically open, it means you have access to it. It's easily available online, and it's available in editable electronic formats that you can mangle and do stuff with. So what are the big questions that we want open data about in development? First big question is, what and where are the opportunities to improve people's lives? Right? This is the basic stuff. We're flying blind without this. Where are the poor people? Who has access to social protection? Who has access to financial services? How are men and women differently advantaged in areas? Which public services are doing well? Which are inefficient? Which could do better? Without these basic facts of what the world looks like around us, market intelligence, if you will, we shouldn't really be doing anything. Second question, as Soren has already said, we need data about who is doing what, where. There are a huge number of actors who are working to answer some of those questions. So governments, aid organizations, civil society, private entities, even individuals. Where is the money going? What are they doing with it? How are different organizations and entities collaborating to achieve these goals? This basic level of transparency is the kind of thing that would have fixed what happened in Aceh with the girl and the vaccines, right? And the third area where we want open data, which I think is probably the most important, is to answer this question of, is it working? That's it, right? Are we achieving the results that we are expecting? Are we listening to feedback from citizens and beneficiaries who are telling us that, yeah, this is good, or no, this is not good? Are we able to adapt, to learn, to improve from what we're hearing about? So those are the three big questions, I think, that we want open data about in development. But remind me, what is the big picture? The big picture is this. Human development, the state of human development, is improving. And we're evolving, both as a society and as a sector. But I think with open data, we will evolve faster, and we'll evolve better. So for me, open data in development means a couple of things. One, it's changing the way we think, and it's changing the way we work. Two, it's about giving open and equitable access to anybody who wants to monitor, to collaborate, to participate, to innovate, just to see what's happening in social development. It's about doing old things better and new things well. And it's ultimately about bringing this idea of open innovation to bear on the problem of poverty reduction. So finally, I mean, for me, open data is not an end in itself, but I think it's one of the most important policy and technical moves in our generation. And I hope you'll hear today, and you've already heard that open data has already helped a bunch of people, but I hope you'll leave by thinking that open data in development is going to help a whole bunch more. Thanks very much.
Next, we have Laia Greeno, who is the Manager of Transparency, Accountability, and Results at Interaction, and she's going to talk about NGO Aid Map. Sorry, I totally messed that one up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'd like to cover two things in my talk today. First, why you should care about NGO Aid Map, and two, some of the challenges that we've been facing. So let me start by sharing what might be a little-known fact. NGOs are major donors. Despite widespread perceptions, NGOs aren't just implementers of government programs. Our preliminary research indicates that in 2009, Interaction members raised about $8 billion from private sources for their international programs. That's funding from individuals, foundations, and corporations. So where does that money go? That's where NGO Aid Map comes in. NGO Aid Map is an initiative focused on mapping the work of U.S. NGOs at the project level and making it accessible to various audiences through an online platform. To date, we've gathered information from over 100 organizations on more than 3,000 projects in 83 countries. We've mapped our members' work in Haiti, on food security and agriculture, and in the Horn of Africa. And you can view this information by location, organization, sector, or at the project level. So, back to my original point that NGOs are major donors. Each circle on this map represents 5 projects submitted to NGO Aid Map, and these are projects with government funding. Here is the map again with projects with mixed funding, so both private and government. And here it is again with projects that are privately funded in orange. Take those privately funded projects away and you're left with a pretty empty map. And so my point is that if you aren't looking at what NGOs are doing, you're missing a major part of the puzzle. So hopefully I've convinced you that you should care about NGO Aid Map, but in case not, let me add a supporting point to that. It's not just that when you get NGOs to report on their data that you'll get information on a greater number of projects, it's also that you get information on what's happening at a greater level of detail. So if you, very seldom does funding provided by a donor stop with the international NGO. More often than not, it's passed on to a local organization. If you just have donors reporting, you might miss the rest of this aid chain. With NGOs reporting, you get at least one step closer to the individuals and communities that are ultimately meant to benefit from assistance. You get a picture of aid that's wider and deeper. So let me move on to the challenges. And I'll just preface this by saying that I don't think these challenges are unique to NGO Aid Map. So the first challenge is timeliness. And with aid information, the saying better late than never doesn't really work. If we're really going to make a difference and improve the effectiveness of aid through better planning, coordination, et cetera, we need to know what's happening in real time, especially during a disaster. We all know the challenges of providing aid information, so I'd just like to make an additional point that for us receiving aid information as well, it's critical that we get this information out there as quickly as possible. And that's a big challenge when you're dealing with vast amounts of information and Also trying to ensure data quality, which brings me to point number 2. Sites like NGO AidMap are only as good as the information that they contain. So for those of you providing aid information, I'd like to usurp an old saying and ask that you provide onto others as you would have them provide onto you. So think about what you would be looking for when you share information on your work. For those of us who are information intermediaries, don't strive for absolute perfection. In most cases, we don't need the Mona Lisa. It needs to be better than this, but there's a happy medium there. The third challenge is what I'm calling utility, for lack of a better word. Build it and they will come. Sure, and people are coming to NGO AidMap and finding it useful, but I think something we've realized is that we have to move beyond the passive provision of information. If all this aid information is going to be really useful and make a difference, we need to find a way of putting it directly into people's hands. We need to do better than wait for them to find their way to our information. And so GIS, which is the point of why we're here, just wanted to mention 3 quick things. First, for aid information to be really useful, we need to know more precisely where aid activities are taking place. And that means that organizations are going to have to invest in their capacity to track and report GIS information. After all, if you wanted to know where houses were being rebuilt after Hurricane Katrina and someone said in the United States or Louisiana, that wouldn't really be helpful. 2, I think we need to start an open GIS information movement. Organizations shouldn't have to beg to get access to boundary files or basic geographic information. That information exists and it should be publicly available. And 3, if we're going to make sense of all this highly localized data, we'll also need contextual information at the subnational level as well. So if you marry information on who's doing what where with granular information on context, I bet we'll make faster progress. Thank you.
I've just been told that at 3 o'clock the World Bank is doing a drill, so we're going to hear some sort of announcement over the PA system, but we don't need to leave the building. So just FYI. So next we have Nicolas Chavant, who is a coordinator with the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, and he's going to be presenting on 2 years of work on the OpenStreetMap project in Haiti. Pull that up. I think it's that one.
Oh, is it good? Okay, so I'd just like to walk you through some highlights about the work that the OpenStreetMap project has been doing in Haiti over the last 2 years since the Haitian earthquake. Cool. So you can see that the OSM community engaged just right after the earthquake, resulting into a magnificent improvement about the baseline data around the quake-affected area of Port-au-Prince. This has been made available by the release of high-level imagery in a license scheme that allows derivative work to be imported into OpenStreetMap. And all this data growing and being available for all GIS actors provided an openness of data sets that were previously restricted, allowing the map to grow even beyond than what was being actually facilitated and made possible by the OpenStreetMap community. I mean, literally hundreds of people from the project that has been working continuously over 1 month to allow this remote phase of the OpenStreetMap response to allow the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team to carry out its first capacity building missions in Haiti. Those missions were meant primarily to help the responders in better using OpenStreetMap, but also being active contributor of OpenStreetMap. This was done through coordination, through advocacy, but also through training and surveying work that were targeting both international actors, national and local authorities, and NGOs, as well as grassroots organizations. This activity of surveying, of editing with the set of tools of OpenStreetMap were things that were all in all enabling the forging of an OpenStreetMap ecosystem, an OpenStreetMap community within IT, which was literally creating crosswalks in between actors from very different worlds. Those training have been happening not only in Port-au-Prince area, but also in other key areas. One of the enablers of those missions were some support materials that were spanning both hardware, tools, guidance materials and training packages, and that were efficient in allowing us in 3 missions to train over hundreds of people, but also creating the basis in terms of human resources for a local OpenStreetMap community group to emerge that was incorporated in August 2010, and that was made of actually hundreds of people that have been and working together with Humanity and OpenStreetMap team with the International Organization of Migration, which out of all the organization active in IT has been the one making the most thorough use of OpenStreetMap, not only in terms of displaying their data, but also in terms of linking their database to manage the strategy of return of the displaced person with OpenStreetMap, as well as improving upon the baseline and using OpenStreetMap both in community mapping schemes, but also in risk reduction programs. Aside of this project, we started with USAID OTI, a baseline project in St. Mark, the town 100 kilometers from Haiti. And there was 2 components in that project. That was first improving upon the baseline, but also creating and training 30 youths from the commune of St. Mark so that they will be able to improve upon the baseline, maintain the maps, but also be able to replicate in other areas the skills that we've been using. That's resulted into maps, into tools, into an ability to engage with local actors. And this is an activity which now is continuing on a voluntary basis. And this layer of voluntary and voluntarism within OSM in IT is something that is facilitated through a series of labs from which you can train, you can design projects, and you can run initiatives that are voluntary initiatives looking at community features, this tap-tap map that Mikkel has been highlighting in his talk earlier on, but also mapping the success of communities' engagement at community level. And all those activities are things that are happening through a mix of international support, but as well as engagement from the mappers that have been hired and paid by some of the paid projects. So that was what I wanted to say.
Next, we'll have a presentation on youth mapping and local governance by Linda Raftery, who's the Senior Advisor for ICT4D at Plan USA.
So, hello. My presentation is going to be around using mapping as a tool as part of a much broader tool set. So this, it says I'm going to talk about Cameroon and Kenya, but everybody loves to talk about Kenya, so I'm going to focus on Cameroon. So the decentralization of the development funding in Cameroon was one issue that councils are working on. And so we've used mapping, physical hands-on mapping for quite a long time because it engages young people as well as adults in identifying issues in the community. But those maps can't be shared outside of the community very easily. Sometimes the municipal councils don't take them seriously. And it's sometimes difficult to update them or to pull them into the broader development process. So we wanted to use digital mapping, and then we found out the information that we could find online. Nothing. So we had to go back and look at how we could find base maps. So we found this guy in the middle, Ernest Kumbega through Active Labs in Cameroon, and he's a GIS specialist in Cameroon. So he supported us with youth groups in the communities to create base maps as well as points of interest. But first we needed to know what information we wanted to collect, why we were collecting information, who was going to collect it, how, and all that stuff. So this was decided by community, by adults in the community as well as youth, with some input from staff. So you'll see in this picture they're sort of having a meeting about what information they wanted to pull together. So they created base maps in 3 areas. This is in the northern part of Cameroon in Pitwa. You can see the base map as well as some points of interest there. But they also wanted to note where all the different chiefs lived, because for the community these were important decision-making people in the community. So they also, you'll see they went through and they listed out where all the houses of all the different chiefs were in the area. Each one of the different points of interest has a data set that goes along with it, and this is what the community staff and young people decided on. So for schools, they would collect, how many benches were in the schools, how many boys, how many girls, etc., so that information could be collected. But we know that it's just information, it's just data, but you want to be able to interpret it. So we worked with different tools, both video as well as art, to talk a little bit more about some of the issues and really try and pull those issues out from the young people so that we could have a better idea. And so young people have a better idea of what the community was thinking and feeling about the different topics that they had addressed that they wanted to work on in their community. Then we supported the young people to work with their communities to have dialogue around some of these issues, and they used this artwork and the maps and all the information that they had to talk with adults in the community about why these issues were important to young people. And then engaging local decision makers. This is a project where we're really trying to make sure that young people's issues are addressed by local government officials and that the necessary budget is put towards them. So we worked with the maps and with the other media information to help engage the community councilors who were making decisions over budget. And in that process, with meeting with the young people, they admitted that they were allocating funds for maybe not the best reasons, for political influence, for communities that were easy to access. As a result of that, the councils invited young people to their budgeting sessions, and they were able to get a large water project funded that they had identified in one of the southern districts where we worked. And they were also able to get some smaller projects that young people would implement themselves. So they did, I believe it was a malaria project, and an awareness raising about getting young people back into schools who had dropped out. I think I was supposed to say something else there. Anyway, so some of the challenges we had is doing the actual base mapping was quite difficult for the youth because they didn't really have any experience with using computers, and the software to do that is kind of complicated. So we were lucky that we had Ernest to help us. It's really important, as I think people said in the morning, to build trust, to involve councils and more than just young people in the process. Combining tech and non-tech tools is also really critical. And going forward, we're going to be looking at how we really use these maps further in terms of government decision making. And there are younger council members who are quite interested in GIS, and the district councils have the responsibility for maintaining GIS maps in their areas. So we really want to engage them and pull them into this process and make sure they also have the necessary training to do it, but also to make sure that young people still have a little bit of some access to make sure that the maps, so that they can hold the community councils accountable for those maps and for the way they're allocating resources. So the partners that we worked with said that mapping was quite impactful on the young people in terms of getting out and working in their communities. That's it.
Oh, wait. We'll wait until they're done.
Please remain in the building and move away from the exterior windows. The perimeter doors to the building are now secure. During this drill, the ventilation system and elevators will not be shut down. If this were an actual emergency, additional information would be provided via the PA system. This drill will last approximately 10 minutes, and you will be informed when the drill is complete.
Okay. By the way, we did ask every speaker to have self-advancing slides, so that's, some people are speaking faster than their slides. So last, we have Laurent Bessasson, who's the ICT Program Coordinator for Sub-Saharan Africa at the World Bank, and he's going to be, should we wait? Okay, sorry, we have to wait. Great, so we'll have Laurent come up and present on the Gateway Drug community mapping for project preparation and disaster relief.
Now that's the way to get your attention. Okay, I'll try to race so that we don't have the end of the drill during the presentation. Oops. So what I'm going to present here is an example of how the bank is trying to use the tools that the open source mapping community has developed, and how we are trying to see how to mainstream those tools in our projects, and combining it with the World Bank strengths. And by that I mean the access to policymakers that the World Bank can provide. But after all, we are a bank, and so one of our strengths is also financing projects. Having information or data is very powerful, but being able to visualize that data for a meaningful analysis, or to be able to coordinate responses is even much more powerful. So that's really what this is about. What we know is that the people who live in the unplanned community, they know their problems. They know what the problems are, they know where the problems are, but what they are missing is the ability to communicate to policymakers and to get some redress. And so for us, Map Kibera, which was talked about earlier, was really an eye-opener. And for some of us sitting in Washington, what we are thinking, well, wouldn't it be very interesting if we could combine this type of facility with our ability to finance and to have policy dialogue with decision makers? So what we did is that we took that in Tanzania in a project that we were financing and that was being developed, and that was around urban revitalization. And it was targeting roads, waste collection, drainage, and streetlights. And Tandale was a slum or an unplanned community which looked like this on the OpenStreetMap at the time. Now, a month later, after a campaign of data collection and empowering the community, this is how the map was looking like. And as you can see, a fantastic feed for what could be possibly financed by the World Bank, where the problems are, and what really matters to the community. And what we didn't expect that happened is that after the big floods around that area, you had some mappers who came back and looked at the market and what was going on after the floods and documented that on the map. Now, empowering the community was truly one of the big aspects, and this was done by pairing community members, students from a local urban and planning university, as well as the local government officers who were involved in the discussion on the project that would be financed by the bank. And so this really points to a critical success factor for us that we identified is partnering with the right actors locally. Tuaweza, a local NGO, OpenStreetMap, of course, we've talked about it, but also the local universities. And here, basically playing to the strengths of the World Bank, you have the mayor of the city discussing the results of the exercise with the community as well as with the folks who are preparing the project. So the policy dialogue part of it. Community mapping, community building. I think what we saw is that a critical part of the experience is how you get the community to taste to the mapping, and how this can be used or this can be leveraged in order to prepare a project. So you use the voice to identify the problems that link to the project design, and then you have, as part of the project, you are looking as to how you're going to use the project to apply the redress part of it. And I think that's what's really important for us as we finance projects, is that it's not about just a mapping exercise. It's a mapping exercise that leads to some form of redress. So for the community, they actually see something that comes out of their participation and they get more taste to it. But also as you activate that network of folks who are interested parties, they become a partner is monitoring whether or not you're implementing the project at the right place, at the right pace. Okay. So what we found, okay. I need attention, but not as much. Somebody leaves the room. So what we find that just like social media, you as a gateway drug, you get addicted to it. We found that for a community who get into mapping, they also get addicted to it, and they want to put the office hours of the clinic in there, what stocks are being stocked, what medicines are being stocked, and so on. So we really see that that's a tool that can be leveraged for other purposes. And can be very useful if a disaster strikes a little bit later, as we saw in Tandale, and then you had activated a community who is actually able to continue to communicate and interact with you and feed the map. One of the things that we are going to be using it going forward is to continue to try to link it to projects that we finance, so that we are part of this redress mechanism, but also linking it to something. For example, in Senegal, we're going to be linking it to an urban flood project, so to see how we can map the underlying critical infrastructure and how this kind of tie in with the projects that we are financing. And finally, gateway drugs, not only for the students and for the communities, but also for the bank. I think as we have our testing leaders starting to use this type of tools as part of a tool to design their project, we see more and more buy-in to do more of that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. That's the end of the Ignite talks, and we're actually going to have a short break right now. So if everyone could be back in the room around 3:35, and then we'll go into the workshop sessions. Most of the Ignite talk speakers are still here, so please feel free to ask them any questions during the break. There is coffee and refreshments in the atrium out that way. Right. Okay, we're going to get started again. So, great. We're going to move into the workshop or breakout session now. And we have lined up some great presenters for this afternoon. The way this is going to work is each workshop will last 30 minutes, and you'll get an opportunity to rotate around to 3 of the different workshops that we have offered. I've asked each of the presenters to come up here and give you a quick spiel about what they're going to be presenting to help you make your decisions on which one you'd like to present or attend. And then also in your packet are a sheet with workshop descriptions as well as a map on where to find the various workshops. There'll be 4 in this auditorium. To your left, through the doorway, will be another 3, and then there'll be another one out in the atrium. So, Alex, you want to start?
Hello, everybody. My name is Alex. So we'll be doing a workshop right there in the corner on the right side of the back of the room at the stairs. We'll be talking about publishing geodata as fast and interactive tiles on the web with open source tools. That's something that not just developers or cartographers can do, but people who with an inclined mind. So I encourage everybody to drop by and check it out. Specifically, we'll be looking at how to create fast and beautiful maps with an open source tool called TileMill, again, over there in the corner at the stairs.
Hi, I'm Kate Chapman with the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. I'll be doing a brief introduction to how you can get started with OpenStreetMap. I'm out sort of where you had coffee, that way. Anyway, it'll hopefully be enough so that you can go home, get started, and start to map your own communities.
Hi everyone, I'm Ariel, and I'm going to be talking about GeoNode in there. GeoNode is an open source tool for data sharing. It's been talked about in a few of these presentations, and specifically I'm going to talk about how it has been used during disaster response in the Colombian floods in 2010.
Hello, my name is Chuck Conley, and I work for IMAP, and my talk is basically going to be looking at primarily disasters, mapping for disasters and emergency response, looking at the operating environment, technical skills and challenges, looking a little bit at the data and the available tools, and then looking at a solution called OASIS that IMAP has put together largely to manage security information in insecure environments. And I think I'm around the corner in room 2, if I'm not mistaken.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Bannock, and I'm the head of GIS at American Red Cross International. I'm going to be presenting along with the esteemed Max Richmond and Nate Smith over here on the topic of institutionalizing GIS. We'll be looking specifically at, from the perspective of NGOs and government agencies about how you can sort of take GIS and mapping from the ground up and make it a part of the culture of what you do, and really a tool for implementing international development projects or disaster relief and response operations. Looking at all the different challenges in the human, whether it's the human or the organization or the technical, and how do you sort of overcome those and make a really good program. It'll be more of a discussion than a presentation. It would be kind of a boring topic to just talk about at length for 30 minutes. Lots of text, not a lot of interactivity. So we'll be more like talking to people, really getting some ideas, trying to get some back and forth, and hopefully get some good ideas out of it for people. All right.
My name is Benjamin Stewart. I'm with the Sustainable Development Network Vice Presidency here at the bank. And I'm going to be talking about a centralized geospatial data repository we've been working on. The bank has commissions data, geospatial data for many of its projects, and until recently we've lacked the institutional capacity to really store that data and share it in a meaningful way. So along with my colleagues from ESRI, we'll be talking about some tools we've developed and talk about the applications we've developed to support sharing of geospatial data both within the bank and hopefully soon with outside the bank. And We're right up here in this corner.
Hi, Steve, Development Gateway. Our presentation will be over in the corner there. We're going to talk about geo-enabling data. We'll be talking about the OpenAid partnership that you heard about, the Malawi map that you saw several times, and some of the very practical work we've done in country governments around mapping and sustainable mapping. Thanks.
Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and just close this out. Francis? You ready? Sorry, this has really turned informal at this point. I just want to thank everyone for coming and for sticking it out through the entire afternoon. I didn't actually introduce myself earlier, but I'm Danielle Heiberg, and I'm part of the mapping team at Interaction. And I did want to make some apologies. Suzanne, who was going to give some closing remarks on behalf of Interaction, had to leave early for a family emergency. But I just want to, again, thank you for coming, and I'm hoping that if you are not already mapping, that today sort of gave you some ideas on how to get started, and if you are already mapping, hopefully this gave you some new ideas on what to do with your work, but also perhaps how to collaborate and partner with some of the other great organizations that are here. Francis Gesquier, who is the manager of GFDRR at the World Bank, and Aleem Walaji, who's a practice manager on the innovation team at the World Bank Institute, are going to provide us with some closing remarks. And then we'll move into the reception.
Hi, everybody. My name is Aleem Walji, and I'm delighted that you're here, even though not all of you are probably in the room that we're here this afternoon. But for me, having not participated in most of your discussions, I'm not going to make any attempt to summarize or say anything profound, as Steve Davenport is laughing loudly because he knows I have no idea what I'm talking about. So instead, I'm going to just say make some observations about kind of what's happened in the last 2 years that I've been at the bank and what this kind of a gathering represents. And I'm going to use the example of something that I would imagine all of you are deeply familiar with, which is this interesting thing that happened between us and Google not too long ago, right? With this Google Map Maker conversation, I'm going to call it, where when we said that we were welcoming the chance to work with Google on them providing us with geospatial data in the wake of disasters, so that we could share with government counterparts. And we, I think, conflated that with crowd mapping, citizen mapping. You, most of you, if not all of you, probably threw your hands up in arms and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And you were right. I'm not sure that I'm supposed to be saying this, but I'm saying it anyway. And the interesting thing about it is that as I reflected on the whole situation, and I hope you feel like we've done right eventually, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second, and OSM should certainly be smiling, is that your voices actually, in an interesting way, represented a very interesting change in the world, right? Which is that you were saying, what the hell are you, the World Bank, doing, you guys that do open stuff, doing working with Google? And who would have thought that that would have been a reaction 2 years ago, right? Where we're, in some senses, perceived left of Google on some of these issues. And some of the people in this room, like Tariq and others, are part of the reason why that's happened, right? And in some weird way, I think that's a really good sign, is that we're actually trying to push the envelope in ways that we want to become part of the community, frankly, that many of you represent. And with the launch of open data and mapping for results, et cetera, I think we're beginning to have some credibility. We're not just talking, we're trying to walk the talk. And where that conversation ended up, just for purposes of clarity, is that our intention was never to say that we want to support closed mapping platforms. our intention was simply to say that if we can work with a partner like Google to make geospatial data more open than it currently is, particularly in the wake of disasters and the like, that can be shared with governments and other partners, we want to be part of that solution. But where we came out on it ultimately is that if we do any citizen mapping efforts, we will only work with platforms that are completely open. So I hope you're happy about that. And you can imagine what the implications of that are right now in terms of who we'll work with. But the larger point here is that, you know, so the World Bank has done some stuff with open, and now we're doing more open geo. Who cares, really? I mean, you know, we are a big institution that certainly can do certain things that matter to us a great deal inside, but what does it really matter, you know, for the outside world? And I would argue that it doesn't, except in the fact that we can be a force for signaling. We can be a force for helping others do what we did, and we can show that it's hard, but it's not impossible. And some of you may have heard of this obscure acronym called IATI, which Steve Davenport is one of the leaders. If you think it's obscure, you can ask him what it is. But it's the International Aid Transparency Initiative. Steve, is that what yeah? And Tarek also. And, you know, it's this wonderfully ambitious and important initiative around people in the donor world saying we should really be open about what we do, right? Like who does what where, in a sense. But it's all about databases, and it's about integrating databases in ways that make sense to probably 27 people in the world. And it's really important, but nobody understands it really, and nobody really knows what it translates into. And recently, we had a chance to present at IATI, I should say Steve had a chance to present at IATI on how mapping could actually make this matter. And if we mapped what the donors are doing with IATI, and we showed the relationship, for example, in Malawi between where children are dying and where donors are giving their billions of dollars a year, and we begin to show that the money is actually not going to where the children are dying, then this becomes important. Now, if only the World Bank is showing the data, again, who cares? But through something called the Open Aid Partnership, which is kind of IATI on steroids, you now see that there's a possibility to use maps and the work that many of you do to be able to tell the narrative and to see the story in a way that becomes very compelling and very difficult to argue with. Now we're starting to matter, right? So when we go from opening World Bank data and having maps that we can create to start looking at platforms through which other donors can start sharing their data, and having initiatives like IATI develop the boring but terribly important things like standards so that data can talk to each other, and then you can start saying that these maps can now start, you know, you can start generating interesting mashups and see who's doing what where, and then you start having Kenya and Moldova and Nigeria and Indonesia and Mongolia that start saying, you know, this open data thing, can you tell us more about that? And now we're learning from Kenya rather than telling Kenya. Now it starts getting important, and now it starts getting interesting. And so what I wanted to say is that I'm tremendously excited about the fact that these conversations, like I'm in front of right now, and that you led and I had nothing to do with, are starting to happen at the World Bank. I mean, John Garrison and I, who leads our civil society work, we're just kind of looking around the room and saying, these people are here. Look how young they are. Look how cool they are. We're engaging with you, and I hope that we're learning with you, we're learning from you, and you may have a thing or two to learn from us, but we are trying to unleash a wave of new ways of doing things that we hope will define the future of this institution and that pave possibilities for what's possible in development, because ultimately, if we continue doing things the way that we've been doing them, we will improve only marginally, and that's not nearly good enough. And we have to rethink completely new ways of doing what we do. And I think these examples of what you guys are doing are very much part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Okay, hi. My name is Frances Guesquière. I am, since Tuesday, the new head of the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction and the practice manager for disaster risk management at the World Bank. I am awfully conscious that I am the only man standing between you and the cocktails. So I will try to be very, very short. But I insisted to be here. I wanted to be here to first to thank you for coming, but also because I think that the DRM community and the mapping community have a really special relationship. Some of you may be aware of this, but 10 years ago, disaster risk management wasn't in any development agenda anywhere. It literally didn't exist. There were disasters, and then we would go and hold and behold, help country rebuild. But slowly, probably also because we've had quite a few of these major disasters in the last 5 to 10 years, if you think about the Indian Ocean tsunami, the Haiti earthquake, the recent earthquake and tsunami in Japan, and literally the last 10 years have been quite dramatic. And slowly, I think the donor community have taken stock of the fact that we build stuff that tend to disappear faster than we can build them. In fact, this year is the highest recorded economic loss resulting from disaster. Actually, the measured economic loss from disaster this year is estimated between $350 and $380 billion, which is about 4 times what we spent in development aid around the world. So consciousness is slowly growing. But I am convinced that, in fact, a lot of the advance we have done in bringing disaster risk management, in bringing a much more proactive stance toward adverse natural event, is the result of a better understanding of sources of risk, of what risk is about. And a big part of that comes from the mapping community, comes from the fact that we have now developed this technique that allows us to visualize risk, to gather information about sources of risk, to understand that certain areas are much more at risk than others, that certain assets are much more exposed. And I would go a little bit further. I would actually argue that it's not just the mapping tools and technique that have emerged from the mapping communities, but also simply some new ways of working, thinking about development in a spatial manner, thinking about how city expands and how this is affecting risk, using crowdsourcing, engaging with local communities, new ways to really involve a wide variety of partners in single program. So I would argue actually that the mapping community has had a big influence on the disaster risk management field, and through the disaster risk management field on the entire development agenda. And you can see it, Alim. We started a couple of years ago, we supported an initiative called Hacking for Humanity, the Random Hacks of Kindness, which started to try to respond to crisis, which is now embraced by the water and sanitation community, the health groups, etc., and which is permeating in many of these groups. I think at the bank we've launched our fair share of initiatives. We've launched this open disaster risk Open Data for Resilience initiative. It changed every 3 months, so it's hard to remember the name. Which try to take advantage of the fact that when people talk about disaster risk, they're a little bit more open to the idea that to share their data. And can we enter through this door to actually open the way for more sharing of information and data so that everybody can benefit from them. We've launched the Central American Probabilistic Risk Assessment Initiative and several other open source risk modeling initiatives, some in the Pacific, some that we support in Indonesia and other areas. We're now going to try to launch the second iteration of the Understanding Risk conference, which really brings people from different communities to talk about risk. And the mapping community has a big participation in there. We were all invited the first week of July in Cape Town. with a lot of partnership with OpenStreetMap and maybe many of the organizations that you probably represent here. And there's one thing we have learned through all these partnerships. The first thing we have learned is that we still have a lot to learn. That, in fact, even if the field would stop today, we still have a lot to learn. But it's a moving, it's a rapidly evolving field where there are new ideas every day. And so, for us, it's very important to continue to be engaged with you guys. We've also learned that we can't do it alone, right? We can't go and map Africa working with Google. We don't think, we're convinced it's not the right approach. But we can do it with many different groups and try to engage with local communities in doing it right. So I hope we'll continue this partnership. That's my main message. I really want to thank Interaction for bringing us all together here with the GFDR team and WBI and SDNIS. I want to thank the different staff that have been working on this, Ralph and Christina and I think Max. And I'm going to stop here because otherwise I'll get blamed for forgetting some of them. And so, as a conclusion, I would like to invite you to stay in touch and maybe open an invitation to repeat this event maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year. We would love to have you here again and really learn from you and continue this partnership. Thank you very much. I think drinks are ready. Have a good evening.
I see us bring that here. We have alone. I didn't have time. I prepared extremely well for the time I was going.